But most of you know by now, if you are over the age of 18, part of growing up and maturing is doing things you don't want to do. An argument that I have regularly with my 3-year-old is, I don't care if you want to, we have to put our shoes on, we have to put our clothes on, we have to buckle the seatbelt, we have to do these things. Here's some of the things that you told me you do not want to do, but you have to. I don't want to go to work, but I have to provide. I don't want to cook every night, but I have to feed my family. Another person said, I don't want to walk 7 miles a day to stay fit and sane, but I do it because if I don't, I won't be able to keep up with my children. Another young man said, I don't want to control my behavior when I get angry at my children for not controlling theirs. I don't want to drive the speed limit. I don't want to adult, cook, clean, wash the clothes, all those things. Then he mentions another pastor in town, which is great. He said, I was listening to Tony Clark, pastor at Calvary Chapel in Newport News, and he said that our carnal flesh is controlled by our carnal minds, and it always wants to do 3 things and 3 things only. Eat, sleep, and have sex. And everything else, we're like, I don't want to do that. Sleep, oh, I want to do that. Eat, absolutely, I'm hungry. But just about everything else we come across, well, I don't really feel like doing that. And most of you know that part of growing up physically is doing things you don't want to do, emotionally, but also spiritually. And as we turn a corner in 1 Peter, we're going verse by verse through 1 Peter, and I've already told our staff this series is going to go much longer because I'm just determined to take my time with it. We've focused the last few weeks on the beginning section of the letter where Peter reminds us who we are. Last week he said we're priests. All along he's been telling us we're loved, we're forgiven, we are God's chosen people. He's also told us that we're exiles, like we are outcasts of society. We are not in the majority. For the majority of Christian history, the church has grown and thrived in the margins, and it's when the church gets in the center of power that everything gets icky, because then people seeking power seek power in the church, and things begin to get watered down as everyone seeks power in the church and money in the church. But when the church grows on the margins of society, and there's no power to be gained by being a part of the church, it flourishes. And so for the first chapter and a half, Peter is focused on who we are. But now he's going to tell us what to do. This is important. Don't miss this. Before Peter just starts giving out marching orders, he reminds us we're loved. That's why I love singing that song we just sang. I am called, I am favored, highly favored, forgiven, because of the power of Jesus' name. We need to be reminded often who we are, but we also need to be challenged on what to do. So this morning, I hope you're encouraged in all that you are. You're forgiven, you're free, you're born again. But Peter now is going to turn the corner. Okay, now that you know who you are, let's talk about what you do. Because here's the truth. Most of us, the things we do that we don't want to do, it's because we haven't really determined who we are. If you don't know who you are, you will allow people to take advantage of you. If you think you're ugly and worthless, you're going to let people treat you like you're ugly and worthless. If you think you're not valuable, you will allow people to misuse you and abuse you because you believe the lie that you aren't valuable. But God says you're created in His image. And your soul has eternal worth, so much value that God sent His Son to die for you and your sin. So before we get into the do, I want to remind you what Peter has said. You're chosen, you're forgiven, you're adopted, you are all of these things. But because you're these things, there are some expectations. So in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11, Peter says, Beloved, I urge you. Beloved is a loving term. He's saying, I love you, but hear me. I urge you as sojourners and exiles. 2 important words. They're used often in the New Testament. Most of us don't like to think of ourselves as sojourners and exiles. This is the idea of being a renter or just someone passing through. We do not have ownership here. We are not bought into this culture. We are not bought into this world. We are not bought into the trappings of this life because we know our life is more than what happens here. So first of all, you need to think as an exile or a sojourner to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which war against your soul. I don't want to step on the rest of my message, but don't miss this. The things your body wants to do that you think, man, if I just did them, I'd feel better. You know the truth. Often you feel worse after you do them. Why? Because many of these things, they're actually warring against your soul. They're crushing your spirit. It goes on to say, keep your conduct among the Gentiles. Gentiles is a common word for outsiders or unbelievers, if you will, honorable. regardless of what they do, keep your conduct honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, get this, you need to hear this, church, not if, when. You need to be okay with this. I need to be okay with this. It doesn't matter how perfectly our church shows the love of Jesus. The outside world will always have a criticism of the church, okay? So when, not if. You need to be okay with this. When they speak evil against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of the visitation. Day of visitation, a lot of misinterpretation there. Some believe it's God coming with judgment. The common rendering here is when God brings his Spirit, when God sends salvation. Because our hope is not just to live lives that people see and they mock God. No, our hope is that in our lives, they would see God and they would come to know the Lord and they would experience the presence of the Lord. And so Peter says, live in such a way where even when they speak evil against you, eventually they come to see the good in you that God is doing through you. So we're going to talk about three things we don't want to do. At least I don't want to do. Maybe you want to do these, but I don't want to do that we see here laid out. Number one, I don't want to say no to my desires. This is the American in me. This is the human in me. If I want it, man, I want it, and I want to do it. And when I want it, and I want it now. But Peter says to abstain from the passions of your flesh. Passions of the flesh, commonly in the New Testament, could be sexual sin, could be given to anger and vengeance and violence. There's one passage in Timothy where Paul talks about being youthful in your lust, and then he goes right into arguing. See, when we think youthful lust, we think lust like sex. No, Paul ties it to just being argumentative. And all of us are thinking about how argumentative we were when we knew everything when we were 24. And if you're 24, welcome to church this morning. We're so glad that you're here. But there are these passions in us that Peter says we need to learn to say no to. Now, here's the common lie today. If my heart wants it, it must be good. It must be right. If my soul longs for it, if it makes me happy, it should be good. Nobody follows that advice in every area of their life. Can you imagine if we all followed that advice in traffic tomorrow morning? You know it would feel real good? Pushing that guy right out of the way that just cut you off. It would feel real good for about 30 seconds. Most of us have enough self-control to identify areas of our life where we don't do what feels good. We don't just enjoy the moment. We know there's a right, there's a wrong. What we need is discernment regarding our desires. Now, here's the thing. God gave you some desires that are good and natural. I mentioned 3 earlier. Sleep, sex, and food. God created all of those. And by the way, can we just give God honor? God could have made us where we just eat grass, and it's tasteless, and it's no good. And some of you are on that diet, whatever. I don't know what's wrong with you. Meanwhile, God gave us this wonderful, I'll just talk about one animal, this cow. And in this cow, you could have steak, you could have ribeye, you could have sirloin, you could have brisket, you could have ground beef, you could beef tallow. I mean, so many good things come from this one animal, and they're so delicious. God didn't just make us where we consume things and we keep moving around. Can you imagine if your whole life you just ate one thing? God made us with this wonderful palate. We taste lots of things. There's this verse that says, come and taste and see that the Lord is good. Do you know why that language is there? Because God has given us lots of things to taste and lots of things to see. God has given us a wonderful and beautiful planet to enjoy. There's so much goodness of God in every area we look. So back to sleeping, eating, sex. These are good things God created, but all of them could be perverted. You can turn rest into laziness. You can pervert sex, take it outside of God's ordained arrangement between one man and one woman for one life. And eating, you can turn it into gluttony. And today, we don't think of gluttony like they did, but gluttony was such a big deal then, and it is now too, because there were people dying of hunger, and meanwhile, there were people stuffing their face, throwing up, while someone died of hunger. So God gives us these good desires. It's not that we say no to all of our desires. I don't want to take this breath. No, you have good desires, but you also have evil desires. Sin has come in and broken us to where we don't just want rest, food, and sex. We want control, dominion, power, our own way, a refusal to submit. We want vengeance. We want violence when it's our cause perpetrating the violence. We want our way. And so what we need is discernment regarding our desires. So Peter starts by saying, if you think of yourself as a sojourner and an exile, you will see that the passions of your flesh are actually waging war against your soul. We don't think of it this way, but this is the truth. There are some things you could do. There's a desire in your heart to do them. But once you begin doing them, they actually begin killing you, harming you, hurting you. Now, we live on the other side of a lot of scientific studies, and I'm thankful for them. But there's a lot of scientific studies that show the more freely you give yourself away sexually, the more damage it does to your heart emotionally. Now, if you're here this morning and you have a deviant sexual past, I want you to know that you're forgiven. I want you to know that God can redeem you. But we also need to identify, God didn't just give us rules. He gave us an instruction manual for human flourishing. And he says that some of these desires, though they may feel good in the moment, can actually crush your soul. We all know what it's like to chase something, to want something, and then only to get it and find the hollowness and the emptiness of having given up all of this to have this, and now it doesn't even matter like it did. There is a spiritual battle over your soul. There are certainly physical ramifications for sin, but more than that, there are spiritual. When we look in the New Testament and the Bible as a whole, we see that God has given us a way of living, whether it's 6 days to work and then 1 day to rest. And some of us, if we're not careful, we will think, well, that's just not a big deal. It is a big deal. There was a study done. College students today are more burnt out, anxious, and depressed than ever. And it's not just the college debt, it's the test scores, it's getting the right job, and they're nervous and they're frantic. And so these scientists did a study, and they tried putting them on different medications. They tried changing their schedule, maybe what they eat, how they sleep. And you know what they found? One researcher put it best. She said, about 85% of this could be solved with one solution. These kids getting 8 hours of sleep. Before the invention of electricity and the light bulb, the average American got 10 hours of sleep. Every time a culture comes along, they try to mess with the 7-day work week or the 5-day work week or the 10-day work week. And what they find is even the animals can't keep up. God created us with these healthy rhythms in mind. And if we're not careful, we as Christians, we will just ignore not just God's instruction not to give in to our desires, but his instruction for our life. God has given us these instructions to protect our soul, our sanity, our well-being, ourselves. But I don't want to say no to my desires. You know what I want? I want my desires to trump God's desires. I want to do what feels good. Now, most of us are old enough to remember a season in our life where we did what we want, when we wanted, how we wanted, and we have debt associated with those desires and decisions. Peter starts by making it clear there has to be a putting to death of your desires, the carnal, the evil desires in you. We're off to a good start. You guys are already enjoying 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11 and 12. It gets tougher. Because in 11 and 12, he uses general language. So some of you are already like, well, that doesn't apply to me. In verse 13, it's going to get super specific. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution. What now? Yeah. The government you didn't elect. The leader of your country that you hate and detest. More locally, the governor that you can't stand. The mayor that you cannot believe got elected last round. Whether it be the emperor is supreme, so he knows that a lot of them are upset with the emperor because the emperor at this point is fighting against the church. Some of them can no longer get the job they used to have because they are associated with the Christian church. There were lies being spoken about the church. It was believed to be, they called them atheists. It's so funny. Back then, everyone believed in lots of gods. Today, people don't believe in God at all. But back then, everyone believed in lots of gods. So when Christians came along and said, no, there's one God, they're like, whoa, you're an atheist. You don't believe in our gods. You just believe in one God? How silly. So no matter which side of culture we're on, we're just outside of the majority. We're on the margins. And so he says, or to governors, the local ones, sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. Verse 15, for this is the will of God, that by doing good, you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Now, that's not how you and I think of it. You know how I like to put people to silence? By opening my mouth and shutting them up. By beating them with logic. And Peter says, no. honor, respect. It goes on to say, live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. You know the second thing I don't want to do? Number one, I don't want to say no to me. Number two, I don't want to say yes to others. I don't want to submit to others. Whether that's Christians, in the Bible, we're called to submit one to another. At our church, there are lots of people who are submitted one to another. There are people who are in small group who come up and they submit to one another. They look for discernment. They're like, hey, what do you think about this? And on our staff, there's submission. As a pastor, I have outside pastors that I submit to. Why? Because all of us need to learn submission. If we're not careful, we will use the language he said here. Don't use your freedom as an excuse or a cover-up for evil. We'll say, well, I'm free. I don't have to submit. I submit to God. But you and I have to submit to others, because if we just submit to God and no one else, we never really grow in submission and maturity. Now, I know as we approach the election this year, I've noticed that many Christians love to submit to the governments that they elect. The laws written by the Republicans, if they're a Republican, they love those. The laws written by Democrats, if they're a Democrat, they love those. But these Christians we're reading about, they had no vote. For the majority of the first few hundred years, most of the Christians, the followers of Christ, were slaves. Varying levels of slavery. It wasn't like what we think of in American slavery, where they were bought and sold and kidnapped, which the Bible condemns. Most of them were indentured servants, and some of them were household slaves, where their job was inside of a home for the entirety of their lives. They couldn't afford to buy out their contract, and so they were slaves, servants. And they were on the fringes of society, no power whatsoever. Most of them were not Roman citizens. And so when Peter says, think of yourself as an exile, think of yourself as somebody who needs to submit, this is common for them, but it's not common for us, right? Because I am a citizen. And so are most of you. And I'm not a slave. And so the idea of submitting is really hard. For not just Americans, but for people in the 21st century West, whether that's Australia, parts of Europe, North America. Verses like this should be quite simple for us to live out in a free society like the one we live in. But if we aren't careful, we will find ourselves getting riled up by online agitators, people with a cause in mind. And Peter, along with Paul in Romans, we are called to submit, and not just to a government we agree with. They were called to submit to a government that was hurting and harming them, legitimately taking their property. So anytime you see a bunch of Christians getting upset or worked up, I would just always want to remind them, we can vote. We can do what we're supposed to. We can be good citizens. But we are never called to lay down our submission. Peter says, in facing this government that is trying to kill you, the best thing you can do is to be subject for the Lord's sake, not for their sake. Don't get this messed up. Don't say, well, I like it because this guy I can vote for, or this guy I can't vote for. I'm going to do it because I'm going to do it for America. No, you do it for the Lord. That's why we do it, for the Lord's sake, for this is the will of the Lord. Peter calls them to submit and serve God alone. Now, some of you in the military, you kind of get this because you do this all the time. Every 4 years, or 4 to 8 years, you might have a new commander-in-chief. But you don't just get out of the military or out of the armed service because there's a new commander-in-chief, because you're not serving that president. You're serving our country. You're serving a desire in your heart that was placed in your heart a long time ago to serve something bigger than yourself and bigger than the office of the president or the Congress that's elected or the Senate. And in much the same way, God is not calling us to serve the American government, to submit because it's the best government ever. God is calling us to submit where we find ourselves and to serve God alone. He goes on to say it this way in verse 17. We'll come back to verse 17 because this is like the climax. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the emperor. You want to know what Peter's really calling us to? He sums it all up here. Honor everyone. Everyone, everyone. I want you to think about the people that on our news, on social media, online have been canceled, and everyone says they're dirt, they're filth, they're no good. Even those humans have souls that Jesus died for. There may be consequences for their actions and for their sins, but God calls us to honor everyone. We do not honor God when we dishonor Imago Dei, people created in His image. I know the next few months are going to get tough in our nation because there's an election coming up, but I hope we as Christians will do our best to never dishonor someone created in God's image. I don't have to vote for them. I don't have to agree with their policies. I don't have to like the way this person in my office talks to me. I don't have to appreciate how they lead our team at work, but I will honor them. Love the brotherhood. The strongest language is always reserved for those in the body. This is why at our church, people from time to time will ask, how come our church doesn't have a phone number? Our church doesn't have a phone number because every time we've had a phone number, it lights up. Lights up. People just call down the list of churches asking for money. And our benevolence policy at our church has always been, it's for the body first. The needs in the house first. You wouldn't believe how many people in our church have been blessed because of the benevolence in this house. Taking care of, you name it, problems with their home, empty shelves, they need food, medical expenses. But our benevolence always starts here. Now, when there's extra, we give to the community over and over through our partnerships and through the things that we do through Adopt-A-Block and the thousands of meals that we donate a year through the food bank that we give to. We do all these things, but our priority of love starts here in this body. So we don't always say this, but hey, if you're here this morning, you're a part of our church, watching online, you're part of our church, and you need help, there is a plan in place to help you. Do not think twice about asking for help. Love the brotherhood. When you love the brotherhood, you trust the brotherhood. You submit the brotherhood to the brothers and sisters. You don't just call them brother and sister, you treat them like a brother and sister. Fear God. This fear is not just I'm afraid, it's a healthy respect. And I'm afraid that in the church today, we don't really honor people really well. We tend to backbite each other, and we have no respect for the Lord. So many things I could say, but I want to be really careful. I'll just say it this way. I was raised in a very traditional church. I'm not wearing a suit and tie this morning, you can see that, but I have a healthy respect for the Lord. Not just anything can be part of a worship service, in my opinion. Not just anything can or should be said in a worship service, in my opinion. We're always going to read from the Bible. We're always going to sing songs that lift high the name of Jesus because, y'all, this ain't about us and what we like or don't like. If you ever leave a worship service and say, I didn't really enjoy that, good, it wasn't for you. We never come here to be worshiped. We come here to worship the one who gave his life for us. Have a healthy respect for the Lord. Now, I know that's going to be played out in very different ways. There are churches more traditional, less traditional than ours, and I'm not casting stones. I'm just telling you the church as a whole, especially in the West, needs a healthy respect for the Lord and the way in which he says things should be done. Whether it's our lives, our church, our lifestyle in the community, and honor the emperor. I can't believe Peter threw this in here. Do you know who the emperor was? This dude was vile and vicious and violent and gross, given to every sexual sin, and we're to honor him? Peter says, yeah, you're even to honor him. Verse 18, servants, be subject to your masters. I mentioned to you that the majority of the New Testament church, they found themselves in some form of servanthood or slavery. Be subject to your master. Not only the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. Now, I don't expect we have too many household servants in the room this morning, so let me put it in our language. Some of us have worked with hard bosses. They're just difficult and hard. Sometimes they're unethical. I had a boss, he had a lot of us that worked for him. We were teenagers. We didn't know it was legal or illegal or ethical or unethical. He had us do some things that I now know were just straight up immoral and unethical. Regardless, Peter says, be subject. Be subject to them. Verse 19, for this is a gracious thing. When mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. This is a way for you to put on display the grace of God. For what credit is it, he says, by the way, some of us, this is where we are. If when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure. Some of us are like, I'm suffering so much, Lord. And the Lord's like, you did that. You're the one. Some of you are like, yeah, my coworkers are the worst. No, you're the worst. You're suffering because you are always late and you have a terrible attitude and you're the one sinning. He says, but if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. I don't want to say no to my desires. I don't want to submit to others, and I certainly don't want to suffer for love. Here, Peter ties suffering and honor or love. He uses those words interchangeably. Jesus, of course, calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves. Here, Peter calls us to love the brotherhood, but also to honor the emperor and to honor everyone. And here's what you have to understand. If you're really going to love someone or honor someone, it's going to be at the expense of suffering. We like to create this fantasy world where I submit to people and it's always easy because they're always great. I love people and they love me back and they always are easy to love because they're just awesome. Have you met any humans? I'm going to honor everyone I meet because people are just the best. Where are you living? People are tough. He says in verse 17, honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. All honor and all love requires some level of suffering. Suffering is a fact of life. You're going to suffer whether or not you love or honor. But Peter wants to tie these two together because he wants us to see how God can redeem suffering in this life. If you really love something or someone, you will suffer for it with it. A few weeks ago, I was at a convention, and there's a pastor. His name is Rob. I didn't even know he was there. He came up, gave me a hug, said some very kind things to me, caught me off guard. Rob was a pastor for years. He's retired now. Somebody I've always looked up to. Rob pastored a church that grew, and he wrote a lot of books. He's a lot smarter than me, but Rob had a wife who years ago was diagnosed with just a tremendously difficult sickness that took her mobility. She was in a wheelchair and slowly took her from him. A few years ago, she passed away. But for years, he was caring for her, loving her, faithful to her. Just a great example of a God-honoring husband loving his wife through a difficult few decades of suffering as she died slowly. Do you know why he did that? Because he loved her. You and I will not often do much for people we don't love, but when we love people, when we're honoring people, we're willing to suffer for them, to suffer with them, to suffer in their place, to suffer so that they don't have to. I think this verse ties it all up real neatly with these just 4 steps that Peter is asking us to take. And here's what I find about these 4 steps. The Bible is referred to as a mirror, shows us who we are. And I think that this passage is a really powerful mirror. It might be one of those magnifying mirrors. Because when we put it up, immediately there's 1 or 2 that we're like, no, don't like that. Don't want to do that. And while you can't say you won't do it because you're like, I'm a Christian, I know it's the Word of God, what it should do is inform you a little bit about yourself. Do you have a tough time honoring everyone? Where's that coming from? Why do you think that is? Is loving Christians difficult for you? What's that related to? I often find that these are related to sins that we harbor. I don't want to honor everyone. Why? Because I'm more important. There's some pride. I deserve the honor. I don't want to love my brothers. Why? Because I love hate. I love jealousy, envy. I love grudges. Maybe this isn't you. I'm just talking about me. I don't want to respect God. I don't want to submit to God because I'm rebellious and I do things my way. And if there's an outline at work of how to do it, I'm going to make sure I do it the other way. And if there's some law that I know I can get away with, I'm not going to follow that law because I am just a rule breaker. I'm independent. It's a lie the American dream put in all of us. No, you're rebellious. I'm rebellious. Got to have it my way. Got to do it my way. And God wants us to fear Him, to honor Him, to respect Him. No. I don't have to honor the emperor. Not this emperor. This doesn't apply. We're given to disobedience. A clear instruction from God's word. We're like, no. I'm not doing that. Did you notice how every one of the sections we read this morning, they juxtaposed a good consequence to each hard action? Did you notice that? It was like, hey, submit even to hard masters, and like the grace of God will be there. God will be in the midst of it, and they will see your good works. Hey, submit to the authority over you, even bad governors and emperors. And as a result, when they go to speak evil against you, they're going to see the goodness of God, the grace of God on your lives. Hey, on the first part, he says, put to death the passions within you that were waging war against you. And when you do this, you're going to keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable. And when they go to speak against you as evildoers, they will see your good deeds and glorify God. This is what we're called to. Now, why does this matter, Pastor Mark? What I do internally with my desires, what I do externally with submitting to others, and certainly when it comes to suffering, why does all this matter? Because Jesus said it this way. Do your good works where others can see them. Don't hide them, put them under a bushel. He likened them to a candle. And when you and I think of a candle, we often think, how dim. Last night, and I don't want to tell you all the details, my dog's old, and so there's smells. That's just what it amounts to, okay? So we lit a candle, and at the end of the night, I turned the light off, and the candle was the only thing in there. And I said, oh, wow, that candle's brighter than I thought. But for me to see how bright the candle was, I had to turn the lights off. And when this was written about hiding your light under a bushel, when Jesus said that, it was so dark because there's no light bulb, there's no electricity. Often they would travel with candles in the darkness, and you could see these candles out in the wilderness or the desert as you were traveling, sometimes for a mile or two if it was held up high. He says, no, put it on a lampstand. Why? So that other people will see your good works and glorify God. Do you know why Peter cares about your thought life and your submitting and your willingness to suffer? Because he said that is your greatest evangelistic tool. Too many of us think, oh, I'm going to tell you how I'm going to win my neighbor. I'm going to say the right thing. No. Be a good neighbor and win them over. Show them you live this out. Don't just go over there. Too many of us have this microwave idea of evangelism. I need to meet someone, and within 30 minutes, I've led them to the Lord. They must have been ready by a lot of other circumstances you cannot take credit for. Often, that is not how it works. Often, we have to build a relationship with people. Living next to them, working next to them. The idea here is not just to endure suffering, not just to honor people as they abuse us, but this leads to them seeing a difference in us because not many people live this way. And so what Peter wants us to do is to live in this way that will draw people to Jesus in how we react to suffering, in how we react to the common desires of our heart and our flesh. And people do notice. Your submission silences the ignorance of foolish people, he says. And then God sees and even honors your suffering when you endure. Now, I know this is the toughest part. We know why we're to live right and act right and say no to our desires. We know we're supposed to submit. But, Pastor, what about suffering? Where's the encouragement here? Because it sounds like Peter's just saying suffering's going to be there. Get over it. And he's not. He's saying so much more than that. He says that when you do this and you're mindful of God and you endure sorrows, he said it is a gracious thing in the sight of the Lord. Don't miss this. God is with you when you're suffering, even if you don't know it, feel it, or even trust it. When I was 19, I was an intern in Bakersfield, California. And I enjoyed skateboarding, so I took my skateboard out there, and I had a longboard for downhill skateboarding. We don't have many hills around here. It's pretty flat. So me and my cousins and buddies, we would go into parking garages until the security guards kicked us out and just skate down the parking garages. When I got out to California, there were real hills. And so over the course of a few weeks as I was out there, I started skating down bigger and bigger hills, and I'd go like 30, 40 miles an hour on some of them. There were some that I just knew from driving, I shouldn't go on that hill. It's too steep. I think it was a Thursday. Maybe it was a Friday. It was really hot. I was skateboarding down this hill, and I was going pretty fast, maybe 35, 40 miles an hour. And I took a wrong turn. And when I took the wrong turn, it led to a hill that I was trying to avoid, and I shouldn't have gone that way. So there was one more turn off of this hill coming up, And I knew I was going to fall. It was fine. I've fallen plenty of times. I'm 19, made of rubber. It's going to be fine. Well, as I start to make the turn around this corner, there's a stop sign up on the corner, and I make it a really wide turn. And I saw the corner of my eye, this guy in his yard, and I realized what he was doing. He was washing his car. And I thought, oh, no. I hope his driveway diverts on the other side, not this side, but nope. When I got closer, I could see in the little dip, it was full of water. So I was already leaning. When I hit the dip, skateboard went, and I rolled. And as I started rolling, y'all, it was the best roll I've ever done. I was hurtling through the air around 30 miles an hour, and I wasn't skidding. I was bumping. So I wasn't even bleeding. And I was like, this is great. Things are going really well. I'm just going to roll because there's a patch of grass ahead of me. I'm going to roll into this dude's yard. But then as I kept rolling, I rolled about 5 times. On the third one, I was like, man, that stop sign is really close to where I'm going to end up. And I wrapped my knee around that stop sign, came to an abrupt stop. And I knew right when it happened, I'm not walking for a long time. And I was in major pain. Couldn't straighten my leg. Just started screaming. The guy washing his car was like, you okay? I was like, no. He said, do you need a phone? I said, no, I had a phone on. I pulled my phone out. I only knew like a couple of people out there, and I was too embarrassed to call them. So you know who I called? I called my cousin who was 2,000 miles away in Virginia. He said, hello? I said, hey, man. He said, Mark, what's up? How's California? I said, not good. And I told him everything that happened. He said, well, dude, why are you calling me? He said, I just want somebody to know what happened. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know, but I feel better knowing you know. I hung up, and some guy was passing by, gave me a ride to my car. I got up there. My keys had fallen out. We had to go back down and find my keys. It's just the worst. But in that moment, you know what I wanted more than anything? I wanted somebody I knew near me. I wasn't married yet. I didn't want to call my mom, so I called my cousin. He couldn't be near me, but I wanted him to know what happened. The Bible says when you suffer, and when it's for doing good, and you're not in the wrong, is a gracious thing in the sight of the Lord. The Lord not only sees it, he's mindful of it, and there's grace for it. This is how people can endure the hardest of circumstances, the most difficult of seasons, and come through seemingly unscathed. It's not because they learned how to roll through suffering. It's because the grace of God was all around them in it. Suffering's going to happen. You might as well honor people, love your brothers and sisters, fear the Lord, and even honor the leaders you didn't elect. Because one day, there will be justice where there's been injustice. There will be healing where there has been brokenness. And until that day, we are responsible for our response to those 4 calls to action. I'm going to pray that the Lord will help me with my battle against my desires, my refusal to submit, and my constant avoidance of suffering. Because if I'm not careful, you know what I'll do? I'll love less people, I'll honor less people, because I know that the less people I honor, the less people I love, the less opportunity for suffering. That is not the way of Jesus at all. The way of Jesus is loving so many and loving so richly and loving so deeply that you will be, as we mentioned last week, vulnerable and even suffer for it. But this, as we'll see next week, is the way of Jesus. We've been called to this way of living.